affair paid a big price for a little fun with me. He lost half of his Johnson, I can't believe it. Why did I allow desires to tempt me and end up falling in another man's chest? I knew that I was married and my husband was a very insecure person. I would always ask myself the same question, but I had never found any answers. So my husband Moses, male 50, and I, female 45, first met in Ibiza in Spain on my 40th birthday celebration. My friends had asked me to let loose a little because I had been cooped up with work and barely enjoying my time. My husband was the host of the event that was happening in Ibiza, and it was a blast. As my friends and I were sitting in the VIP section, my husband came to us and asked if we were enjoying the event. I couldn't even answer him because I was so glued to his handsomeness, his perfectly shaped face, nicely trimmed mustache, perfect white teeth, and to top it all, he had deep dimples, which made him look sexier. My friends brought me back to earth by shaking me because if they were to call out my name, I was not going to hear, the way I was so focused on the guy. So when I had finally come back to my senses, they told me that the host was speaking to me. So if a person speaks with you, you should give them all your attention. So I looked at the guy in the eyes to show that he had my attention. He started by wishing me a happy birthday and asked us to join him and his crew on another section to make my birthday more fruitful and fun. The way he was speaking, I was taken back and charmed. Mind you, I had just recovered from a very abusive and controlling fiancé, who I thank God every day for taking me out of that relationship because it was toxic. So we went to join him and his crew, and they were very welcoming and full of life. We really enjoyed ourselves. The guy kept asking me if I was fine, and that really amazed me because no one had ever shown so much care, even if I was in a place of having good times. Well, I have that love obsession with guys who have dimples. Was I being sluttish? The host, who later became my husband, came to sit next to me and introduced himself as Moses. He was actually from Manchester in England, so he had come to Spain for his first big event. Mind you, I was also from Manchester, but I had never even bumped into him, even by mistake. We talked throughout the night up until the event ended, and he was super exhausted to even continue working, so he opted that we exchange numbers so we would be able to talk. 2 days after, Moses texted me and apologized for texting late. I got very charmed. He was such a gentleman. I mean, not all guys text a girl after 2 days and apologize for texting late. Guys nowadays are douchebags and don't even think like gentlemen. So what Moses did was what I didn't expect and was charming. He told me that he was going to go back to Manchester a day after, so he asked to take me out and enjoy his last day in Ibiza. Obviously, I agreed. I mean, who wouldn't? It's really hard rejecting someone as handsome as him, and to top it up, he had a very sexy voice. So we met, we had a very lovely day together. He even bought me a birthday gift, of which was something I didn't even expect. We got along pretty well. It was like we were cut from the same cloth. We had a lot in common. We shared a lot about ourselves, our goals. Funny enough, I even found out that he was actually not far from where I was staying, as he lived in Chorlton-cum-Hertford, and I lived in Salford, which was about 15 minutes apart. Moses was working as a sound engineer, which explained the event he had hosted in Ibiza. We got pretty close. It was like we had known each other for a very long time. As we had gone back to Manchester, he promised to see me again, and I couldn't wait, I couldn't wait to spend more time with him and get to learn more about him. Was I already falling for the guy? I couldn't get him off my head. We chatted every day, and I was actually falling for the guy. The attention he would give me was on top of the world. He would always ask if I was still okay. He was really fussy over me in a charming way, though, and I loved the attention he gave me. We went out a lot. He introduced me to his friends and his colleagues that he was working with. It was truly a great moment for me. We started dating after 3 months of getting to know each other, and I was falling hard for him to a point that it looked dangerous because I would have a bad day and be in a bad mood if he didn't talk to me for like an hour. I think I was obsessed, but no, I wasn't. I was just feeling the guy on a deeper level that it was sometimes scary. I would think, what if he leaves me someday and finds someone else better, who would be on his level, and I would be left alone to pick up the broken pieces of my fragile heart. 7 months later, he proposed. Our relationship was ecstatic. He made sure to always make me feel special in every way. You know when someone makes you feel like you are the only important thing in his life? Like you are the apple of their eyes. Well, that was what Moses made me feel. He was not ashamed or scared to show off his woman to his either friends or colleagues. He made sure to always make time for me, even if he was busy or he would be hosting an event somewhere. He took me with him. So Moses proposed and we got married 2 months later. Well, I had wanted a small and intimate wedding, but the guy had so many relatives, colleagues, and friends. So it was kind of a big wedding, but nonetheless, we were both happy. Our families were happy. Moses was the guy of a guy that most girls fantasize or dream to have in their lives, and I had that. We were so much happy and so much in love until we were not. As time went on, Moses had started being the boring person. I couldn't understand what was going on with him because if I would try and address the issue, he would just make an excuse about being under pressure at work. He was no longer spending much time at home. It was like I had become his housemate because in the morning we would both go to work. Well, more like he would go to work very early in the morning, then I would be left behind and go around 8. And when it was time to knock off, I would be in the house earlier than him as he had recently started coming back home late at night. My husband Moses was a good man, but he was also boring. Well, he had started being a very serious and boring person 6 months after our wedding. He was not giving me his time and attention anymore. The thought of him cheating on me and finding someone better than me came across my mind, but I would put the thoughts away and console myself by convincing my heart that Moses loved me enough, and a lot for him to just cheat on me. I thought he was going to change, I had faith in our relationship and marriage. The change he made was very huge to a point that he never wanted to go out and explore new things with me like we used to anymore, and he never made me feel like I was the center of his universe. It was a lot, and it was hurting me a lot. I couldn't even address the issue that we were facing anymore because I knew what his excuse would be, so it was no use trying to find the cause or the root of our problems. One weekend, a friend of mine hosted a party, and that was where I met him, the man I cheated with. He was charming and handsome. He introduced himself as George Jackson, male, 47. He was really funny, and he knew how to make a person forget their problems. From that moment we met, there was undeniable chemistry between us. He made me forget that I had a very huge and depressing problem in my house. My husband was depressing me to a point that I was sleeping with wine every night. George and I talked for hours, and I felt more alive than I had ever been in years. George was attentive and complimentary, showering me with affection. He understood a woman's needs and desires, He made me feel like I was a woman again, and that I was not the problem. It was a lot, and I was drowning. As we were talking and laughing, George started telling me sweet things that would make any woman melt. But then I remembered that I was actually a married woman. We spoke more about ourselves. I even mentioned the problems I was facing in my marriage. He was kind and understanding, and he listened to me without judgment. He offered me a shoulder to cry on and a sympathetic ear, something that Moses had failed to do. Over time, George and I became close friends, and I found myself confiding in him more and more. He was always there for me, and he made me feel seen and heard in a way that Moses had not for years. So we started hanging out as friends, of course. As the months passed, my friendship with George grew stronger, and we started to develop feelings for each other. We began an affair, and I found myself feeling alive and desired for the first time in years. He had that dopamine over me that I was missing, and every moment with him was magical. I loved my husband, but this newfound excitement and admiration was intoxicating. I knew I shouldn't have done this, but the thrill of being desired by someone new was hard to resist. It felt like I was living in another dimension, It was really refreshing. The way Moses didn't pay attention to me, he didn't even notice what was happening in front of his eyes. I had thought he was going to notice some changes in me or the way I was always out. I was no longer spending much time in the house, especially during weekends. I was always out with either George or by myself. That was how ignorant he was. I would always wonder what was happening in his head, but I got tired of being concerned. I needed his time, attention, and affection, but he was too busy for that. I once had thoughts of him cheating on me or performing adultery on our marriage because of the way he was acting. What was hurting the most was that someone else was giving me the attention I had always longed for, the time I needed and affection, and it was not my husband. George was giving me an adrenaline rush, and he was making me happy. Putting a smile on my face and thinking about him would make me giggle like a little girl seeing her crush. I don't even remember when was the last time I had felt like that. I was sure that even my soul had a dust of sorrows because I was no longer happy with my husband. George had that effect on me that I couldn't even explain, but it was there. Sometimes when my day wasn't a great day, if he didn't call or if I didn't see him at our secret spot, he surely knew what I'd been missing. Was I too attached to George? Well, I think I was. One evening, George suggested we sneak away for a romantic getaway together. Moses had not been home for a couple of days. Well, it was more like he would come back from wherever he was very late, and I would be long asleep, then leave very early around 6 in the morning, and I would still be sleeping. I had never been on a real vacation with my husband, besides on our honeymoon, which was cut short by an emergency that needed him at work, and the thought of escaping my mundane life for a weekend with George was enticing. I had to come up with an excuse to leave the house, so I texted Moses and told him that I was going out with friends for a weekend getaway just to show him respect. George and booked a room at a hotel in the city just a few hours away. When we arrived at the hotel, he took my hand and led me to our room. He pulled me close and kissed me passionately. The moment was electric, and I melted into his embrace. I felt really great to feel someone giving you such attention. I couldn't even remember the day I last had an intimate moment with a male person or my husband. He would always come back tired to even touch me. The only thing he managed to do was giving me a perk when he came back from work or going, and that was it. So it was actually a very good feeling and escape for me. George and I spent the entire weekend exploring the city and getting to know each other better. George showered me with compliments and made me feel like the most desirable woman in the world. It felt so right at that moment, like there was nothing wrong. He made sure to shower me with money also. He was such a romantic person. My weekend with George was what I had really needed. It was truly therapeutic for me. So as we were exploring the city, George had suggested that we go to the beach. Since it was hot, so the weather allowed, we went to the beach. He then asked me to swim with him. I was a bit hesitant at first, but he begged me and I couldn't resist his begging, sexy eyes, so I eventually agreed, so we swam together. As we were swimming together in the ocean, I felt a rush of excitement and guilt. I knew that what I was doing was wrong, but I just couldn't help myself. I was tired of feeling ignored and unappreciated by my husband, and this handsome George guy was making me feel alive again. After the swim, George and I went back to the hotel room and spent the night together. It was a passionate and intense encounter, and I felt like I had finally found the attention and affection I had been missing from my husband. George was so gentle with me. He appreciated and complimented my body in a way that I felt like living my true self. He took me to another planet. I was feeling all sorts of tingles and butterflies inside me. As our weekend together came to an end, I knew I had crossed a line. I was falling for George, but I also loved my husband. I felt guilty about what I had done and wondered if I should confess everything to him or not. But confessing was going to ruin a lot of things and destroy my marriage. It was like I was stuck between a rock and a very hard place, and I didn't even know how to get out of the situation. As much as I loved my husband, but sometimes I find myself feeling particularly lonely and unappreciated. Imagine being with someone, my husband, that you only see once or twice on weekdays. He comes home when you're asleep and leaves early in the morning. When he is at home, he is in his office and he doesn't want to be bothered unless you would be bringing him something to eat or snack on. I didn't know what to do anymore because he was not even paying any attention to my concerns. As much as I needed his time and attention, I was really concerned about his health. He was too attached to his work to a point that he would just lock himself in his study or small office room the whole day. I was really worried about him, and the connection that we had was slowly fading. I had been patient for way too long. I mean, even the heart that loves also gets tired, right? And love alone was not enough if there was no connection and affection. So George took that step and closed the gap that I was feeling in my marriage. George made me realize that there is actually a lot you can do and achieve in life. You just need to know what you want and make sure it makes you happy. I was no longer happy in my marriage, but I was happy when I was with George. Was that even normal? My affair with George was purely and strictly an intimate affair. No feelings were involved. I knew that I loved my husband so much and I wouldn't want that to end. I loved Moses. In fact, I still love him so much, and I don't think there would ever be someone that I would ever love like I love him. My marriage meant a lot to me. I know that what I did was very stupid and selfish of me. I had not only jeopardized my marriage, but I had broken my wedding vows that I had made in front of my whole family. I committed adultery knowing very well that I was married. I had thought that maybe I was the problem. I started doubting myself. I had thought that maybe I was no longer enough for him, or I had changed and got ugly. What was I supposed to think? I started having low self-esteem. I was sinking deep into depression, but luckily I had George to distract me from my sorrows. He was everything and more. I told my parents about what was going on in my marriage, and the advice I got was, in marriage you have to be patient with your husband. Just make sure not to make something that would drive him away from your marriage. I didn't understand that kind of advice because it was useless and pathetic. Days later, my husband once asked me if I was still happy in our marriage. Stupid me, instead of being honest, I lied and told him that I was still happy. I know it was a pretty dumb move that I had done, and I regretted not being honest in the first place because honesty and communication is the key to successful marriage and relationships, right? But I chose to be a liar and a fool out of my husband, not knowing that he actually had evidence of my cheating ways and he knew the truth. It was just that he wanted me to come clean and confess everything to him, but I failed. About a week later, my husband had been home a lot lately, and it really surprised me because I even forgot when was the last time I had seen him around the house. The worst part was not being locked up in his office working. As much as it was supposed to make me happy, but I was not, especially for the sudden change of heart. He would still tell me that he loved me, but I didn't, and I couldn't believe it anymore. I mean, there were a lot of loopholes in his act, and it was really alarming. One would think we were so much in love and would look like the perfect couple ever. But I knew my husband and he was hiding something from me, and I had to try and find out what he was really hiding. I was so unstoppable, I was just hooked in the lovemaking that I was doing with George. I didn't care much about my husband anymore. I mean, I had got on my feet and I was getting what I had been desiring for the longest time. So I would just leave Moses in the house sometimes and tell him that I was going to meet up with someone while I was going to meet up with George in our secret location. Little did I know that the bubble that I was in would soon be busted, and it was not going to be very nice. I became the person that I would not even recognize. I had started lying a lot to Moses about my whereabouts, and I would wear revealing clothes. I'm sure Moses would see that I was lying about where I was going at times because of the way I was wearing and where I said I was going to. I really don't know what was happening to me, but whatever it is that was happening, I totally regret it. It changed me in the worst way possible. Even my parents would be concerned about me. But little did they know that I was actually having an affair with a guy who drove me crazy with his intimate action. One day I had lied to Moses about where I was going. Forgetting that I had married a very analytic man, I didn't know that he had access to my phone, though I had once suspected since he loved sitting on computers a lot or sometimes borrowing my phone, I don't know for what. I told him that I was visiting my friend Lawrence, not knowing that he already had information of where I was going. So I met up with George in the restaurant. We went there to order something to eat before going to our secret spot. It is a 30 minutes drive from my marital house to the restaurant. If I knew that on that day the universe wouldn't be on my side, I wouldn't have gone to meet up with George. George and I got into our secret location, and without wasting any time, we got into what we did best. We made so much of S****, and it was so wild. It was like we knew that it was going to be our last day together. The way things were happening, I should have known that something big was going to happen, but with my nonchalant self, I didn't even notice. I was just so caught up in a small bubble that George and I were in. We were really enjoying each other's time and affection. That time, George and I were deeply in intimacy. We were doing all those nasty and freaky things. George really knew his things and had a lot of experience in this intimacy department. He knew what he was doing. It was like he was trained, you know. The way he was so gentle with a woman's body, it was like he had learned it from the book or at school. Somehow I wished that it was at least my husband who was doing all those things to me, but it was just a random man that I had got from my friend's party, and that man calls himself George. As we were chilling after we were done with our intimate sessions, George started confessing his feelings for me, which shocked me because I took him as just my destruction, my intimate partner. I couldn't understand his sudden developed feelings. I rejected him and told him that I was married and he was just my intimate partner, and that was it. I didn't see him in the way he was seeing me. The guy did the unthinkable and blackmailed me to at least spend 2 nights at his house or become his booty call. He even told me that he will pay me a lot of money if I agree to that. You know, if I didn't want my husband to find out about the times I had been spending with him and telling him about my marriage problems. I was so surprised by his sudden change, I didn't know what to do because he had been recording all our conversations, which I didn't know about. I had no control over the situation. I didn't want my husband or my parents to know about my affair with this man. I just couldn't believe that George would do me like that. I mean, I had thought we were just having a good time and just having fun because he was also engaged to be married. What we were doing was not supposed to be happening, and it was not supposed to even start. Him and I had broken our homes and jeopardized our relations. So I didn't and couldn't understand why he would suddenly get attached and decide to confess his feelings for me. In an instant, I received a notification that I had received a very big price from Mr. Jackson. I just couldn't believe the amount of money that he had transferred. All that money for spending 2 nights at his house and having a little fun. In my mind, I told myself that this man is crazy because there was no sane person who would pay someone that amount of money just because he wanted to have fun with me. I mean, we were already having fun, so what was the point of buying me just to have that fun? Since I had decided to just cut all contacts with George despite the amount of money that he had transferred on my account, I had to focus on my marriage. I told myself that I had a lot to lose if I were to continue playing George's puppet. A week later, Moses came back looking angry. He didn't even tell me what had made him angry. He slapped me and called me names. I was so confused and shocked by his outburst until he told me that he knew about my floozy ways with the guy I met at the pub. Since that day, my life became miserable. I was paying for the stupid decisions that I had made. My only sin was trusting a stranger and telling him about my marriage. Worst part, even if I tried to deny it, Moses had proof, which meant that the guy had sent him everything because I had blocked all contacts with him and filed for a restraining order since he was starting to harass me, threatening me. I think he was somehow kind of obsessed with me because there is no other reason why a person would act like the way George was acting. I thought he was not going to bother me anymore since it had been a year. I didn't think he would come back and I would be stuck in the middle of everything. So I was just chilling at home, going through some Netflix. Moses had moved out of the house without saying a word, only the time when he was calling me names and telling me that he knew about my floozy ways. I really missed my husband so much as some of the words that he had said to me stung, but I knew that I had deserved them. I mean, I had done the poor guy wrong, and I somehow found myself in a sticky situation with my affair. A few days later, I received a call from an unknown number. I first hesitated to answer it, but eventually I did, hoping that it would maybe be Zach because I had been trying to reach out to him. I wanted to apologize and maybe try and fix our marriage. To my surprise, it wasn't the person I had expected, but it was my worst nightmare, Steve. When I answered the call, he just told me to meet him at the hotel not too far from my house and told me the room number if I didn't want my shenanigans to be on the front page of the newspaper. You know, when you have no control over a situation to a point that you just go with the flow and obey the request that you had been given. That was me agreeing to meet up with George at the hotel just because I didn't want my affair with him to be posted all over social media and newspapers. I mean, it would create a lot of chaos and unwanted attention. So I went to that given hotel location. Mind, I had told myself that I wanted to put him in his place so that he would not bother me anymore. I was just fed up with George's threats. I even wished he would maybe disappear from the Earth's surface and never come back. So when I got there, I found him with only the hotel gown, drinking those expensive whiskey and smoking cigars. He didn't even wait for me to settle down, or at least greet me. The guy just went straight to the point. He told me to have a little fun with him and I would be in charge since he had paid me a lot of money. I tried telling him where to get off, but he just said that he wanted all his money back or I obeyed his request. So he came to where I was sitting and started touching me to a point that I lost control. You know the effect that George had on me and my body? So my body reacted to his touch even though I tried by all means to ignore what had been happening in my body. But it wasn't possible. It was really hard resisting the person who only knew how to make your blood rush and heartbeat abnormally. We ended up kissing, doing all those foreplay moves. Remember, I was in charge, so he had no control over what was happening. I was also in my moment. I mean, would you blame me? I hadn't been intimate for a long time, and I had been longing for some action since my husband left wherever he went. As George and I were very much into it. You know, I couldn't contain myself any longer, so I decided to just get on top of him so I can do what I do best. I always enjoyed intimacy with George, but that day I really don't know what happened. I just couldn't believe the thing that suddenly happened. I knew George as the lion in bed, but what happened during our session was something that I was not expecting. It was just embarrassing, really, and I saw that he was also embarrassed. You know, I was so much in the mood to get some vitamin D to at least reach climax and release, but that ended up not happening because of what happened. So as I was getting on top of him, getting ready to ride him like my life depended on it, I saw that he was also ready for me and everything that was going to happen, but the moment was ruined by one simple thing. So when I was starting to ride him, I felt something weird, like I was actually riding air or his hip. I started ignoring that because I thought that maybe I was too much into it, so I should just continue. But the moment kept getting weirder, you know. I got off him and to find out that he had actually lost half of his Johnson. Imagine the embarrassment, and the mood was just drained to a point that I got so angry because that wasn't the George that I had been having an affair with for the longest time. The way I was so pissed, I just left him in that hotel room and told him to never contact me again with his sick Johnson. I couldn't believe that the moment was just ruined just like that, and I couldn't even reach my G-spot. I drove back home angry like that. I didn't notice any weird thing in my car because I was angry. So as I was driving, I heard my car tire bursting, then the car lost control. I tried swaying it to avoid it colliding with other cars, but I failed and my car collided with the truck. Well, more like it bumped on the back of a truck. Then another car came and collided with mine. It was just a mess and a disaster. Grateful to my mother's connections since she was an attorney. It didn't take any longer to find out who had tempered my car tires. When my mother told me, I just couldn't believe it. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. I was devastated. I couldn't believe that Moses would actually do something so sinister to a person he claimed to love, and that person is his wife. As if that wasn't enough, I saw the news on the hospital TV and I was crushed when I saw that the house that they were talking about being in flames was actually my matrimonial home. Nothing would explain what had started the fire because I knew that Moses was behind it. meaning all my things, including my IDs, were burnt in the house. After a month, my parents took me back home. I couldn't eat nor was able to talk to anyone for about 2 or 3 weeks. My life was taking a huge, unexpected, and depressing turn because I had been receiving notifications stating that my accounts had been wiped clean, including the account that I had opened when I started the affair with George, so that Moses wouldn't find out about those transactions. And obviously I had thought that it was Moses who was behind that also. But when my mother told me who was behind it, I was shocked. I mean, George had money, so why would he wipe my accounts to spite me? That was not the only thing that he did, because he even posted our intimate moments on social media. I was trending for months, people exchanging words about me and calling me names. I wished I could be wiped from the surface of the earth, just like how my accounts were wiped. I had to start afresh everything, restart my life. My parents helped me a lot during the healing process. It wasn't easy, but with God and my parents' support, I'm still trying to get on my feet again. I want to avenge myself, or maybe find justice for myself for all the things that Moses and George did. What should I do? Please help me. I need ways on how I can get justice for the actions that these two men did to me in my life. I really need my life back.